Chapter 16. After Patch finished the milk, we ran our fingers around the inside of the pail, licking each finger until there was nothing left. I began to think, if Devlin had taken Anna's cow and her pig, if Devlin had come for the rent, what about our rent? And Da not home with the money? What about Muck? What about Biddy and her sister? I left the pail on its side. I took Patch's hand. We must go home. A store, I told him. We must go quickly. We went down the road, Patch dragging his feet. My own legs felt like pieces of lumber that had washed up in the surf, numb and heavy. But somehow we crossed the stony field to our doorway. Granda was on the floor, rooting through one of the baskets, mumbling to himself. Celia was kneeling at the hearth, blowing on the turf. No one else was there. I leaned against the doorway, holding my side, trying to catch my breath. They looked up. Celia's nose twitched, a sign she was going to say something I didn't like. "I'm going to kill Biddy's sister," she said. "She hasn't laid an egg in days. She doesn't have enough to eat." My mouth watered. Poor sister. I couldn't help it. Grandin glanced up at me, waiting for me to say it wasn't a good idea, but I couldn't. He went back to rooting in the basket and pulled out an old frieze jacket. "Warm enough for this weather," he said, brushing it. I hardly paid attention. "Devlin hasn't been here then?" I said. Granda stopped brushing and Celia turned away from the hearth, still on her heels. "He took Anna's cow," I said, "and her pig." Celia rubbed her hands on her skirt. "We have to count on Muck and the piglets to come." 6 piglets, Patch said. "We don't have the money for the rent," I said, shaking my head. If only Da were here. Celia lowered her head. Was he ever this late in coming? He'd always come by this time, I thought. If he could be anywhere, he'd want to be here. "I know that," she said. "Do you think something has happened?" I didn't want to answer. The ship might have foundered. He could have starved on the road. He could be sick. Granda sat, thinking. "When Devlin comes, you will ask him for a few days," he said. "I will go to Galway to find your father." Celia said, "I will go." Just then we heard the horse coming down the road. My hands began to shake. With one movement, Celia grabbed up Biddy's sister and was out the door with Patch in back of her. She darted around the side of the house, holding on to the hen. I shooed Biddy out, but there wasn't time to do anything about Muck. At the doorway, I watched the horse come closer. Devlin was on his way from the Mallons, coming toward us. Outside, Biddy's sister clucked, more than clucked, screeched. Inside, I heard Granda fall over something, metal clattering against the stones of the hearth, Granda groaning. Devlin wheeled the horse around, dust flying. "I've come for the rent," he said. I hardly paid attention to him. I went back into the house to Granda. He pulled himself to his feet, and I reached for him, holding him tight. Devlin had followed me inside. "You know why I'm here." "My Da," I could hardly speak. "He's fishing out of Galway. As soon as the rent is due in half from last time." I shook my head. "I will tumble the house and put you out on the road," he said. "But for now, I will have the pig and the hen." He walked back to the doorway, his hand sweeping over the field. By the mercy of God, the other hen had stopped screeching. "You will still owe the rent." He glanced across the yard at poor Biddy pecking on something, at Muck trying to find a blade of grass to ease her hunger. He pulled a small book out from under his cape and wrote something in it. "Bring them to the dock. They'll have a sea trip to England." Then he was on his horse again, following the road away from us. Granda sat down heavily in front of the fire, and Celia appeared with scratches on her face and hands. "You saved the hen," I said, and ran my hand along her reddened cheek. "You are a great girl, Astor. And you," she said, "you as well." That afternoon, I thought, was the saddest in my life. "Send the sister off," I told Celia. "We will keep Biddy." "Eat Biddy?" Celia asked, shocked. "Never," I said. She nodded. "That is why we must keep the sister and let Biddy go." I knew what she was saying. If we did not eat soon, how could we go on? We made a meal of the sister, closing the door tightly, hoping that no one would come. Still, I saved 2 morsels for Anna. I would have saved a third for Sean Red because he would have done that for me, but they had sent him down to work on the road near the bay, and I didn't know when he would be back. When the poor little meal was finished, Granda stood up. "I will go down to Galway to find your father before it's too late." Once his mind was made up, neither of us could change it. Celia and I stared at each other, thinking what had to be done. I spoke first. "Celia will go with you. She is older and stronger." Words I would have never said before. And what I didn't say was that staying in this house alone at night with Patch was the worst thing I could think of, and I couldn't do that to Celia. And Nory will watch out for Patch. Celia bit her lip. She will wait on the chance that we miss Da. Only one road went to Galway, and it wound along the coast like a ball of yarn let loose. Da had said, "You won't miss him if he's there." I told her, "Just stay on the road." Celia and I stared at each other. We knew we might never be together again. "I will hear you singing always," she said. They left early the next morning, moving slowly enough for me to take the comb out of the basket and run after Celia with both pieces. "Take it," I said. "Keep it. Half yours and half mine." "I know why you said you would stay," she said, taking one of the pieces and pressing the other into my hand. "I will never forget it." I wanted to tell her I remembered the day we had broken the comb, remembered her staring at Patch's bed and deciding not to take the road to Galway. If she had, I thought, she wouldn't be taking this terrible trip now. She'd be in Brooklyn, America, safe. I couldn't say that, though. I'd never get the words out. I ducked my head. "Celia, loyal and true," I managed. She ran a strand of my hair through her fingers the way Maggie had done. "Stay alive." I couldn't answer. I couldn't even speak. She ducked out the door. She grabbed Patch up from the step, hugged him, then took Granda's hand. She turned one last time. "Someday." I knew she was thinking of Smith Street, Brooklyn, and all of us together, except she didn't know they would be there and I would be here. I could never leave Anna. I owed it to her to stay. We stood there and waved, Patch and I. Then it fell for me to wrap Biddy limp and quiet in a bag and tie a rope around Muck's neck. Muck. How we had counted on her piglets. I remembered when Da had brought her home. One day he had said, eyes crinkling, "We'll have piglets for the rent, with turf in the hearth, potatoes in the pit, and a thatch on the roof. We'll need nothing more to keep us happy." "Unless it's a bit of soil that belongs to us," Granda had said sharply, "and land that's free of the English." I shook my head, then left Patch with Anna and took the road to the harbor. I wasn't alone. A long line of people were leading animals. Mrs. Mallon with 2 goats, someone with a pony and 3 or 4 pigs. I thought about singing. I even opened my mouth, but my throat was dry and not a sound came out. Instead, I just walked with the others. All of us were quiet. Only the animals made sounds. One of Devlin's men rattled by on a cart with a few pieces of furniture, a wooden chair, a settle, a pile of rusty tools. At the dock, in the noise and the rain, I saw Anna's cow and her pig. The men whipping animals onto planks of wood that led to a ship. It was a ship filled with food that was going away from us forever. And then I hurried home to s'more the fire. Patch and I went to bed without food, to think about Brooklyn, New York, and Celia and Granda out on the road to Galway.